Hello and welcome to my review for The Batman. This will be a spoiler review, so you are being warned here and now. I originally planned to do a non-spoiler review and then transition to spoilers at the end, but later decided to do just a spoiler review. As you can tell from the posters behind me, I am a big fan of the character of Batman. He is in fact my favorite character from DC Comics and one of my favorite superheroes, period. I will preface this by saying I don't read a lot of comics, although I have read a few and plan on reading the comics that inspired this film, including Year One, The Long Halloween, and Ego and Other Stories is what that third one is called. With that out of the way now, I will get into my review. But first, the synopsis. In his second year of fighting crime, Batman ventures into Gotham City's underworld when a sadistic killer leaves behind a trail of cryptic clues. As the evidence begins to lead closer to home and the scale of the perpetrator's plans become clear, he must forge new relationships, unmask the culprit, and bring justice to the abuse of power and corruption that has long plagued the metropolis. So I enjoyed this movie a lot, although it didn't feel much like a comic book movie. Instead, it felt like a detective noir thriller. This movie didn't feel its length, other than with slightly uncomfortable seating. That may have something to do with how engaging the story was and how beautiful the cinematography was. Seeing it in IMAX, while it didn't fill the screen, it was immensely vibrant. I love how this movie dove deeper into Bruce Wayne's parents and their history adjacent to criminal activity. And I also found that it was wild that Bruce's mom was a part of the Arkham family, and that may come up in future sequels as a bigger plot point. The acting was excellent, and I liked Robert Pattinson's take on the Batman, and I hope to see more of his evolution as Bruce Wayne and Batman in future sequels. This was a very different take than previous Batman, because instead of relying on surprise attacks, he just walks up to criminals, which is so intimidating because he just doesn't fear death.
I don't care what happens to me.
The bat signal was also more horrifying to criminals because he could always be lurking in the shadows, so even petty criminals are scared of him. The chemistry and sexual tension between Batman and this proto version of Catwoman was one of this movie's many strengths. And I would love to see the evolution of this version of Catwoman through the sequels and perhaps HBO Max spin-offs.
I can take care of myself.
Andy Serkis's Alfred showed how much he cared for and worried about Bruce. And while he helps Batman, he doesn't necessarily encourage Bruce to continue. I would love to see more of him in future sequels because we didn't get much from him in this film. The costumes fit Matt Reeves' world, especially his bat suit, the proto Catwoman suit, and the Penguin suit. And that will probably evolve in his HBO Max spinoff. The Riddler costume has been criticized by a lot of people as being not comic book accurate, but this suit still works with the overall aesthetic of this film, and it's a more grounded take on the character. Coming into this, I wasn't a huge fan of the Bat theme composed by Michael Giacchino and thought I preferred the Dark Knight theme. While watching the movie, I grew into liking it so much that I started to hum it in the car on the way home. I loved how the theme got more powerful than the more brutal Batman got, and adored the piano-only version near the end. The way they introduced the Batmobile midway through this movie also made it feel like its own character. In addition to the Batmobile, Batman has a ton of valuable gadgets in this film. I especially liked his flying squirrel suit. That one was a really cool suit and sequence for this film. The Riddler also had very interesting, elaborate traps and puzzles for Batman to solve that kept it really engaging, and his probably going to make this movie really rewatchable, as with most Batman movies. Some criticisms I had about the film include that Gotham looked like New York City. And I understand that in the Dark Knight trilogy, it looked more like Chicago. But again, I think the best Gotham City that we've seen is probably from the Michael Keaton version, because it doesn't look like a city in our world. The Batcave also in this film seemed like an abandoned train terminal, although further in, it did look very much like a cave. I also had a problem with the Joker cameo since it wasn't really necessary, and I was pretty concerned that they would try to use him in a sequel and do basically the same thing as they did with Batman Begins. Start with a lesser known or one of Batman's other villains and then move to Joker. Although I will say that Matt Reeves has stated that he wouldn't be using Joker for the Batman 2, and that wasn't the intention of this scene. But I do still feel as though that scene wasn't necessary to the overall story, because there was other endings that were also in this film, including the Penguin scene where he's looking out over the city, and Catwoman riding off to Bloodhaven. I will be okay if he decides to use the character of Joker for one of the HBO Max spinoffs. Specifically, he's got one set currently in Arkham Asylum, so that would be a fine addition in that series. But at the same time, he doesn't need to take a huge role in that series, maybe just there as part of the Arkham Asylum prisoner. I also felt as though they probably could have cut one or two storylines for better pacing, specifically the Catwoman and Carmine Falcone father-daughter type storyline didn't really need to be there. But otherwise, it's all the stuff that was in there was really necessary to be in there and really flowed well. I also thought the ending was great, with Bruce learning that Batman can't only strike fear into the minds of criminals, he has to be a hero for the citizens of Gotham. It's one of the most hopeful endings we've seen in any of the Batman films. It makes me think that Bruce will be more of a present figure in the sequel and have a different persona even, because in this film, Bruce was very brooding and kind of just reluctantly going out as himself, whereas in future sequels I feel he's going to be more as the playboy type, maybe not as much of a playboy as others, but he will still have a little bit more of that, and maybe he'll be more of a philanthropist in those sequels.
Mr. Wayne, you know, you really could be doing more for this city. Your family has a history of philanthropy, but as far as I can tell, you're not doing anything. If I'm elected, I want to change that.
While this isn't your typical Batman origin story featuring the death of his parents, the training to become the Batman, and learning to fight crime, this is still a new beginning for Batman, where he will learn and grow through the different sequels after this, and he learned and grew through this film instead as well. My biggest hope is that they will cover the Court of Owls as one of the villains in one of those sequels, again, where you can use the history of Thomas Wayne and Martha, who is actually part of the Arkham family, in those type of roles, and how these powerful families have so much control over Gotham. Overall, I rated this movie a 4 out of 5, which bumps up Matt Reeves' average score for films he's directed to a 3.4 out of 5. In terms of my Batman film rankings, this would be number 3, only behind The Dark Knight and Batman Begins. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up button. If you have any comments you'd like to say, maybe put in the comments your favorite Batman movies and your thoughts on this film. If you'd like to see more from me, please hit the subscribe button. I will probably be taking a bit of a break from my previous series of videos where I'm covering franchises and directors for just for now, and I'll return to them either later this month or in April. I'm going to be covering a lot of one-off films or maybe a couple films here and there, but it's not going to be a whole series. So you'll see what I'm talking about when I get to those starting next week. Thanks again for watching and have a great day.